Hey guys, today is chapter 4, section 2, and it is about the Inca or the Incan civilization. Kind of like we talked about in the last chapter, there wasn't a lot known about those early South American, Native American civilizations, but the Incans are probably the most studied and most talked about. Most of you, like I said in the last section, have probably at least heard about these people if you haven't been taught about them, but you've heard about them. So we're going to talk about them and some of their achievements and whatnot. First thing we need to talk about is where did they live? Well, the Incas lived in what is called the Cusco Valley. Cusco is actually, I believe, the capital of Peru, or maybe not the capital, but I know that's where like a lot of people still live today. A lot of people are actually Incan, have Incan ancestry, are part of the Incan people, and so the Incans are led by these warrior kings that they call Sapa Incas. That is Sapa, Sapa, and then Incas, just like you think it sounds. Incas. And so that's kind of what their king would be called. And the greatest king in the history of the Incans that we at least know about is a guy that goes by the name of Pacuti, or Pachacuti, who was the largest and greatest ruler. He ruled for more than 30 years and built a very powerful army. But the interesting thing about Pachacuti is that he didn't really like to use the army, right? When he was going to other Native American lands and talking to them, he basically offered them a deal. Uh, you join the empire and you can follow whatever religion you have. You can still have the same ruler. They just have to listen to the Sapa Inca, right? But basically, everything stays the same. And the only thing that the Incans would ask for is a little bit of tax. And taxes looked differently back then. Obviously, like there's not a currency. So sometimes you would be taxed food or sometimes labor. So you would send a couple people from your village to an Incan village and you would help them build temples or houses or roads or whatever it may be. But that's kind of interesting for this time because not a lot of Native American rulers ruled like that. And so here is a picture of Pachacuti, or who we think that is. So let's see. Erase that. Sorry. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about how there were 4 Incan governors, and each ruled a province. So here is what we roughly think their provinces were. A province would be like a state or a city that these governors were in charge of, right? So the red area was one, the yellow area was one, the blue area was one, and that little green area was one as well. Some of you are probably thinking, well, why does the green guy only have that much land while the others have a ton? I'm guessing, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that green area was probably the highest populated area. So they didn't need, they didn't need a lot of land to cover all those people. It was just a little bit of land, and they only needed one ruler for that little area. But society was grouped in multiples of 10. So each village was divided into groups of 10 families. And then those were organized into large groups of 100, 1,000, or 10,000 families. So a little different than what our other Native American groups looked like. After that, the Incans, when they took over land, it wasn't like you could still follow the same religion and you could still have your own leader, but you had to learn how to speak Quechua or Quechua, which was the Incan language that we know of today. So here on the right side, you can kind of see the differences in languages, which is amazing that we can translate that. But as the Incans begin to rule over other people, their language begins to spread because of that. And then they also used what this is called as a Kipu or a Kupi. There's lots of ways to pronounce this, and obviously I'm not a native Incan speaker, so I'm probably butchering it. But this was actually a way to keep records. The issue is historians don't really know how they kept records with this and what they kept records on. Some people think that like they might have kept count how many llamas and alpacas they had, maybe how much money somebody owed them, maybe how much work somebody had done for them. But they know that this was some type of recording instrument, kind of like a pen and a paper would be today, but this is how they did it back then. Historians are still trying to figure it out how and why this was used, though. So, next we're going to talk about Incan achievements. The first one that we are going to talk about is how they built things with stone. As you can see here, these rocks aren't perfectly cut, right? It's not like one brick and then a brick is laid on top of that brick. But it's almost like a little jigsaw puzzle where like it doesn't fit perfectly, but it fits on top of each other. And the reason that this is kind of amazing is that during earthquakes, which are common in this area, this would break because it just isn't made to rock and rumble, right? If it moves a little bit, it cracks. When earthquakes hit this one, though, they have this spare room right here where they can kind of rock back and forth against each other. And so I'll actually show you guys a video in which it kind of explains how amazing this is. So one of the reasons that historians believe that Incan buildings and temples are still up and available to look at to this day is because of that in their architecture. So kind of amazing. Then next we have roads. The Incans are known for building roads and bridges that span tens of thousands of miles. They built bridges that some people still use to this day, and the roads are still used to this day. It's kind of amazing because it's way ahead of its time. And remember that they're living in the mountains, so it's not easy. We'll look up one of their bridges when you guys are done listening to this video, and it's kind of like those off of a movie where there's the rope and the wooden bridge, and you know, like it's going to break or the rope's going to get undone and you go swinging from the jungle, right? Which is, again, pretty amazing. Then their jewelry, which they made jewelry, dishes, statues, and wall decorations, which were made out of gold and silver. And then they were also skilled in astronomy, and they developed these calendars. This is an Incan calendar. I cannot read it for you, but that's what it looked like. So there were two social classes within Incan society. There was the nobles and the commoners. Now, remember that their kings, like most South American kings or rulers, are said to be like kind of related to the gods. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more here later. But basically, to be a noble person, you had to be related to the king. So that's siblings, parents, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren. And if you were related, then you were basically a noble. And then if you weren't related, you were a commoner. And so those that lived in the nobles got the finest houses, the best food and clothes, and usually held high government offices. Commoners, though, they were the working class, like we've seen time and time again within South America and Central America. What was different is we believe that their commoners were divided into categories based on their age and their gender. So a few examples that I have for you. Boys between the age of 12 and 18 would herd llamas and alpacas. Girls aged 9 to 12 would gather wild plants for dyes and medicine. And then men aged 25 to 50 would raise crops and also serve as soldiers. I'm guessing if you're a woman over the age of 12, you probably got married, had children, took care of the home. So again, quite amazing that these people last this long, and this is their social class. So Elias. And Elias is kind of the clan which families were a part of. And it's the basis of the Inca society and how it functioned. So each Elias or Eliu would have its own farmland and homes, but really they didn't own that. The government, the Incan government owned it, would loan it to those people. And then those people would pay the Incan government back by paying off taxes. Basically, again, giving back food to the Incan government, building buildings for the Incan government, giving them llamas, alpacas, whatever the Incan government needed. And so it turns out to be a pretty good system of living for back then. So I talked about this a little bit, but the Incas worship many gods. But the most important being Inti, who was their sun god and the most important. And so the rulers, the kings of the Inca, were believed to be kind of relatives to that god. And so basically, you would worship the king. And if you worshiped and listened to the king, then that showed that you were worshiping and respecting Inti, who was the sun god. So it's a very interesting perspective. Um, like I said, we know more about the Incans because more people have studied them and there's more writing available. And Incan people are still kind of around to this day. Obviously, they don't speak the native tongue and they don't worship the same gods necessarily and they don't read the same passages, but they still have Incan blood in them. So we know a little bit more about the Incans than we did the other South American cultures. Uh, Again, fill out your note sheet as you're listening to this. If you have questions, please raise your hand. Let me know. Otherwise, keep up the good work, guys, and we'll do what we're doing. So, see ya. Have a good one.